I gave my time, my money, my heart to people who needed me. But the moment I needed them, suddenly, they were all too busy. That silence said everything. You know the type. The guy who shows up when your car breaks down on some lonely back road at 2 in the morning. The guy who lets your drunk cousin crash on his couch even after he swore never again. The guy who always says yes, even when it costs him. Yeah, that was me. Name is Jared. 38 years old, and for most of my life, I was the dependable one. Not because I was trying to win some good guy award, but because that was just how I was wired. If someone needed help, I was there. No questions. No judgment. Just action. I have pulled more people out of messes than I can count. When my buddy Chris got evicted, I gave him my spare room for 8 months. When my sister, Rachel, racked up a mountain of credit card debt, I cut her a check, no lecture, no strings. And when Derek from work needed someone to cover his shift every Friday so he could be there for his kid, guess who stepped in? Thing is, I never kept score. I never threw it back in anyone's face. I just figured that was what people did for each other. And I guess I believed, deep down, that if the day ever came when I needed help, someone, anyone, would show up for me too. But that is not how things went. Because the day I finally asked for help, they vanished, one by one, like ghosts. It started when I lost my job. 10 years with the same company, and they let me go with a cold handshake and a box of my things. No warning, no severance, just a downsizing email and a security escort. At first, I told myself it was fine. I had savings. I would bounce back. But 2 months turned into 6. Interviews dried up. Bills piled up. My car started making noises I could no longer afford to ignore. And I started waking up in the middle of the night, chest tight, wondering how the hell I got here. Then came the night I swallowed my pride and picked up the phone. I called Chris first. No answer. Texted Rachel. She said she was super slammed with the kids. Tried Derek. He left me on read. 3 messages. 3 ghosts. That was when it hit me, not like a punch, but like a slow, freezing crawl through my chest. I had always been there for them. But now, I was alone. And that was just the beginning. The days after that were a blur. I kept trying to tell myself it was just bad timing. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they would call back tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went. Then another. Then another. And nothing. I spent my mornings refreshing job boards and my nights staring at the ceiling, my thoughts bouncing around like marbles in a jar. I started rationing food without realizing it, half a sandwich here, skipping dinner there. The worst part? I still checked in on everyone else. Still scrolled through social media and liked Rachel's pictures of her kids, even though she had not answered a single message. And the flashbacks, they hit at the weirdest times. Like the time Chris called me crying after his wife left. I drove an hour at midnight to pick him up from some bar where he had punched a jukebox and split his knuckle open. I cleaned him up, put him to bed, and stayed the night just to make sure he did not do anything stupid. Or the time Rachel called me sobbing about the power company. Her lights were going to be shut off. I paid the bill the same day, no questions asked. Never even asked her to pay me back. Or when Derek got caught sleeping in the locker room after his divorce and I offered my garage so he could store his stuff until he found a new place. These were not random favors. These were sacrifices. Time, money, peace of mind. And now? Now I was down to my last $100, an overdue rent notice, and a fridge that looked like a desert. So I did something I had never done before. I posted on my feed. Things are rough right now. If anyone knows of any jobs, side gigs, or even just a couch for a few nights, please let me know. Simple. Honest. No ego. And in return, silence. Except one comment. From an old classmate I had not spoken to in 15 years. Damn man. Hope you're good. That was it. Hope I'm good. I read those words over and over again, until they stopped meaning anything. Then I threw my phone across the room. But it did not crack. I did. And that night, I did something I had not done in over a decade. I walked into a liquor store. And I walked out with a bottle. One decision. One old habit. And everything I had held together started to unravel. I told myself it was just for the night. Just something to take the edge off. Just a little relief to quiet the noise in my head. But that bottle did not last the night. I sat on my sagging couch, cracked the seal, and took the first sip like it was medicine. The burn felt familiar. Almost too familiar. Like a door I had shut years ago creaking back open on its own. By morning, the bottle was empty. I woke up on the floor, head pounding, mouth dry, and phone blinking with missed calls. But not the kind you want. Just spam. Scams. One from a debt collector. I dragged myself to the bathroom and stared at the face in the mirror. Puffy eyes. Stubble creeping back in. I looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that sinks into your bones and refuses to leave. That afternoon, I found an envelope taped to my door. It was from the landlord. Final notice. I had 5 days. 5 days before I was out on the street. I sat down on the floor, right there by the front door, and something inside me cracked. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just silent. Like a thread snapping somewhere deep in the dark. And all I could think about was this one time, years ago, when Derek called me from a payphone after getting fired. He had nothing. I drove 2 hours to pick him up and gave him $500 in cash. He never paid me back. Never even mentioned it again. That memory just sat there in my head, heavy and uninvited. And that was when it really hit me. They had never seen me as a friend. Not really. I was a resource. A crutch. A backup plan with a name. It was not just the silence that hurt. It was the realization that the kindness I had given, freely, gladly, was not something they ever intended to return. Not because they couldn't, but because they never planned to. And that thought, that was worse than any eviction notice. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. And I made a decision. I was going to vanish. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. I packed what little I had left. A few clothes, my old laptop, a stack of notebooks I could never bring myself to throw out. I left behind the TV, the couch, even the bed frame. I figured someone else could use them more than I could. I dropped the keys in the landlord's mailbox and walked away without looking back. No dramatic post. No final goodbyes. Just silence. The bus station was a 15-minute walk, but it felt like hours. Every step was heavy, like I was carrying the weight of all the years I spent being the guy everyone called when things fell apart. I bought a one-way ticket to a town I had never been to. Some random dot on the map with cheap rent and no familiar faces. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness. Not relief. Just quiet. I found a room above a thrift shop. The landlord was this older lady named Mrs. Breyer who reminded me of my middle school librarian. Soft-spoken, always smelled like peppermint, but sharp as a tack. She did not ask too many questions, just handed me the keys and told me to keep the noise down on Sundays. I got a job unloading trucks at a local grocery store. It was not glamorous, but it paid enough for ramen and rent. And for once, that was all I needed. The days were slow. The nights were slower. But I started to breathe again. Sometimes I would sit by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, and I would think about Chris and Rachel and Derek. I would wonder if they ever noticed I was gone. If they even cared. Then one night, I got my answer. My phone buzzed. A message from Derek. Hey man, haven't heard from you in a while. Hope all's good. Listen, any chance you could help cover my rent this month? Got laid off. I'll pay you back, promise. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry. Not bitter. Just done. I did not reply. I blocked his number. Then I turned off the phone and left it in the drawer. And just like that, I closed the door. Not with hate. With clarity. Days passed. Then weeks. I kept my head down, clocked in, clocked out, ate simple meals, and slowly rebuilt what I had lost, not in things, but in pieces of myself I had not realized were missing. One night, I opened the drawer, powered up the old phone, and found 3 more messages. Chris, bro, where you been? I got into a bit of a mess. Could really use your help. Rachel, hey, I hope you're okay. Mom's sick. I know you're mad, but please call. And one from a number I did not recognize. Jared? This is Derek's friend. He said you might be able to spot him a few bucks. I read those messages like I was reading someone else's life. Like I was just a ghost hovering above the version of me they remembered. The version who never said no. But he was gone. And in his place was someone new. Someone quieter. Sharper. Not colder. Just less willing to bleed for people who would not notice the wound. I started writing again. Not for money. Not for anyone else. Just in the margins of a notebook, scribbling thoughts that had nowhere else to go. Stuff like, do not mistake being needed for being loved. Or, if they only call when they are falling, let them learn how to stand. Simple truths. Ones I had ignored for too long. I also started talking more to Mrs. Breyer. Turned out she had a small book club that met every other Friday. She invited me once, and I figured, why not? There was something healing in sitting around a mismatched table with people twice my age, drinking lukewarm tea, and arguing about fictional characters like they were real. No one there knew my past. No one expected me to save them, and that made it easier to breathe. Then, out of nowhere, one of the biggest plot twists landed on my doorstep. Literally, a letter. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. Rachel's. I held the envelope in my hands, unsure if I should open it or toss it straight into the trash. But curiosity won, and what I found inside changed everything. Rachel's handwriting had not changed. Still neat, careful, like she was afraid of making a mistake even on paper. The letter started with a simple, "I am sorry." Just 3 words, and yet they hit harder than any of the messages or calls before. She said she knew I was gone, not just physically, but really gone. Said she had been thinking about all the times she leaned on me, all the ways I showed up without being asked, and how, when I finally needed something, she looked the other way. She wrote about our childhood, about how I was always the calm one, the fixer, the one who held things together when our parents were too distracted by their own storms. And she admitted something I never thought I would hear from her. "I got used to you always being okay, and I stopped checking if that was actually true." She went on about how their lives kept moving, how Chris got back with his ex, how Derek found another place to crash. She said she did not think they really noticed I was gone until it hit them. No one was picking up the pieces anymore. But what got me? She ended it with this: "I am not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see you. I see what we did. And I hope someday, if you ever feel like it, you will come back. Not for us. For yourself. No manipulations. No guilt trips. Just truth." And that shook something loose in me. Because part of me had started to believe maybe I was the problem. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I expected too much in return. But that letter? It was the first real acknowledgement. Not an apology wrapped in excuses. Not a handout request with love thrown in at the end. Just honesty. I folded it back up, slid it into the drawer next to the phone, and sat for a long time staring out the window. I did not cry, but I did feel something warm settle in my chest. Forgiveness, maybe. Not for them. For me. And for the first time in months, I slept easy. But the quiet would not last. Because a week later, I came home from work, and someone was waiting for me. It was just after 6 when I stepped into the hallway, boots wet from a late spring rain, jacket clinging to my back. The hallway smelled like old wood and lemon polish. Familiar. Safe. But the second I turned the corner, that feeling cracked. Sitting on the steps outside my door was Chris. I froze. He looked up like he had been practicing what he would say. His eyes were bloodshot, not from tears but the kind of exhaustion that comes from a life falling apart. He stood slowly, hands jammed into his hoodie pockets, face tight with uncertainty. "I figured maybe you were here," he said. I did not answer. He kept going, like he had rehearsed it in the mirror a dozen times. "I know I screwed up, man. I know you needed help and I just kept living like you'd always be there. I do not have an excuse." He glanced down at the floor like it might offer him better words. "I lost the place last month. Gina left again. Took the kid this time. I got no one else, Jared. You were always the one who picked me up. And I figured maybe you could do it one more time." The silence between us stretched. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not just physically, spiritually. Like the weight he used to toss on my shoulders had finally crushed him when he had to carry it alone. I thought about the letter from Rachel. I thought about that night I slept on the floor with an eviction notice in my hand and not a soul willing to answer the phone. And then I said something I had never said to him before. "No." His head jerked like I had slapped him. "I am not doing this again," I continued, voice calm, steady. "I am sorry you are going through it. I really am. But I am not your safety net anymore." He tried to speak, stammering something about all the years, about brotherhood. But I shook my head. "All those years, Chris? I was there because I believed you would do the same for me. And you didn't." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because he knew it was true. I stepped past him, unlocked my door, and paused with my hand on the knob. "For what it's worth," I said without turning around, "I hope you figure it out. But not with my help." And then I walked inside and shut the door. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. But that night, another letter arrived. This time, not from family. And its contents? They turned everything I thought I knew on its head. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just my name, written in looping, unfamiliar handwriting. At first, I thought it might be junk. Another credit offer or some scam dressed up as opportunity. But something about the way my name was written made me pause. It felt careful. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The ink was blue. The tone almost hesitant. Dear Jared, you do not know me. My name is Sylvia. I used to work at the food pantry downtown years ago. We met once. You probably do not remember, but you stopped by during a snowstorm. You brought bags of groceries, coats, and a box of clean blankets. Said they were extras from your work drive, but the tags were still on everything. You helped a woman carry a bag to her car. She had 2 kids with her. One of them was me. I sat down, heart racing a little. The words kept going. I was 10. That night, we ate like kings. For once, my mom did not have to pretend things were okay. I have thought about that day often, and I always wondered who you were. I did not know your name until recently, until someone posted about you, saying you had disappeared, gone quiet after helping so many for so long. They made it sound like a tragedy, but it did not sound tragic to me. It sounded like someone finally choosing themselves. I wanted you to know you mattered. Not because you gave things, but because you gave without making anyone feel small for needing it. I hope wherever you are now, you are finding peace. You deserve it. I stared at the letter for a long time. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From something softer. Something I had not felt in a long time. Recognition. Not from someone I knew, but from someone I had helped without ever expecting a return. It was like the universe finally whispered back, you did good. And just when I thought I had processed that, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, but persistent. 3 slow knocks that changed the rest of the story. I opened the door slowly, expecting maybe the landlord or some local kid selling something. But it was Rachel. She looked older, tired, not worn out in the way a rough day makes you look, but in the way life does when it is chewed through your pride. Her hands were clenched around her purse strap like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. For a second, we just stared at each other. No words. Just the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. I did not come to ask for anything, she said. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she cleared her throat like it would erase the tremble. I needed to see you. To say it to your face. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the silence thick but not hostile. Just real. She told me about Mom. About how her health had taken a turn and how Chris had spiraled after losing everything. She talked about how Derek bounced around couches until people stopped answering the door. They all keep asking about you, she said. Like you're some missing piece they never realized they needed until it was gone. I said nothing. Then she pulled something from her bag. A photo. From one of our childhood birthdays. I was maybe 10. She was 6. We were both covered in cake, smiling like we had the world in our hands. I look at this, she whispered, and I remember a time when you were not just the helper. You were my big brother. And I let the world twist that into something else. I let us lose that. I took the photo. Not because I forgave everything, but because it still meant something. I'm not coming back, I finally said. Not the way I used to be. She nodded, wiping her cheek with the edge of her sleeve. I know. And maybe that is a good thing. We sat there for a while longer. No need to fill the silence. She stood to leave, and before walking out, she said one last thing. You deserve better than what we gave you. I hope one day you find it. Then she was gone. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because they changed, but because I had. And in the quiet that followed, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I sat with that photo for a long time after she left. Not in grief. Not in nostalgia. Just stillness. The kind that wraps around you like a warm coat after too many cold nights. The truth was, I had spent so many years trying to be enough for everyone else that I had forgotten how to be enough for myself. But something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet rearranging of the soul. I started going for walks again. Not with a destination, just motion. Letting my legs carry me through unfamiliar streets until the weight on my chest felt lighter. I began writing more. Not just journal stuff, but pieces of the past I had buried, stories, memories, even pain. I let it all spill out onto paper like a wound finally allowed to breathe. And somewhere in the middle of all that healing, I realized something that changed me. It was never about them. Not really. It was about who I became trying to keep them afloat. About how I had tied my worth to their needs. How I thought love meant self-erasure. But love, real love, does not keep score. It also does not drain you dry. One evening, I found myself back at the thrift shop downstairs, talking to Mrs. Breyer. She asked how I was doing, and without thinking, I smiled and said, better than I have been in years. And I meant it. Not because things were perfect, not because I had found some magical fix, but because I had finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued. And that was everything. Now, when I think of Chris, or Rachel, or even Derek, I do not feel anger anymore. I feel distance. Not the bitter kind, the peaceful kind. The kind that says, I am not mad, but I am done. I did not burn bridges. I just stopped walking back over them. And maybe one day, they will look across the water and remember who I was. But I will not be there. I will be somewhere quieter, somewhere better. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away without slamming the door.